business plans are a terrible idea. How would I start? I did just start a company, I guess, right? So I came up with a problem, which is really difficult. I spent 7 years building Obie. The only reason I lasted 7 years, which by the way is short in the grand scheme of things, like life's long. But 7 years is a slog for something that, was a good success, not like a great success. And the only reason I made it through that journey was because I was obsessed with solving the problem. People get really obsessed with the solution or the underlying technology that they're using or some other sort of emotional reason, but all those things are going to change if you stay in business long enough. And so really what you have to be passionate about is a problem that you can see yourself pursuing for a very long time. And so that's where I start when I think about building a company. What's a problem that I can really, really fall in love with and see myself spending the rest of my life building?
You look like you're in a already very professional setup.
I'm good at fooling you. This is just a makeshift phone booth we have in our office.
I like how it looks. But yeah, thank you so much for offering to basically be one of the guests for the podcast. We might as well jump in. I think we're gonna have a good conversation. So I'll just give the listeners basically a little bit of an introduction. Today I'm excited to have Chris Buttenham, a McMaster alum, join me. And I actually first met Chris back when I was a student at McMaster University. He was a guest speaker in one of my innovation classes, and he shared his entrepreneurial journey, which then later I got to work with him on a class project, and he was one of the local companies we chose to work with to solve a problem, which was a really great experience. And since then, I followed his journey, and I saw that he built Obie AI and eventually sold it in 2021. And now he's working on a new company called, is it Reins? Is that how you pronounce it? Reins? Awesome. And you're helping essentially small and medium-sized businesses, which is really cool to see because that's essentially my target as well, to help them. So it's really cool that you guys are essentially helping owners find a way to retain them and to reward them. So that's something new I've never seen before through a profit sharing model. And we'll maybe just talk about how you essentially got started, what you learned along the way, and then what we see next for Reins. But I found it really interesting. I took a look at your website, and you said you were always an entrepreneurial thinker. It mentioned that you started actually off as a magician, which is really interesting. And then you later founded a media company at 15, and then which brought you to all your other different projects. And I find this such a common kind of pattern among all the other entrepreneurs that I've spoken to. They're very innovative in the way they think, and they're constantly thinking of new ideas, new things. So if you can maybe talk to the audience a little bit about kind of your early journey and maybe why you chose to be a magician to start off with, and how it even came up to where you are now, essentially.
Yeah, it's a funny past, a little unorthodox. I always say I wanted to be an entrepreneur before I knew how to spell entrepreneur. So, I'm fortunate in the sense that I always knew what I wanted to do. A lot of people don't know that, and I'm really empathetic to that. But I did. But, there's all kinds of different flavors of entrepreneurship. And so it was a very, very well a long, windy road to landing on the companies and projects that I did land on. The whole magic thing is interesting. I was obviously a nerdy kid, and my dad used to come down to Las Vegas all the time for trade shows for his business, and he would always bring me back magic tricks because Las Vegas is the magic capital of the world. And it just became a hobby, and I really enjoyed it. And I think like a lot of entrepreneurs, I ended up monetizing my hobbies. So I started doing gigs, and I was making pretty good money actually, at 14, 15, making $250 an hour, doing magic at corporate gigs. So that was cool. And it was like, my first real business side hustle type of thing. What happened was I got into video production at the same time, and I kind of merged those two hobbies. And so I started like filming my magic. And the reality was is I think I liked the business side and like the editing videos and video production more than doing the corporate gigs. I liked magic, but I just didn't like the sort of song and dance of it all. And so anyways, that kind of parlayed into what the business actually became, which was a company I called TMP Media at the time. And I basically, it would be called a digital agency now, but we did, branding, web design, video production for solopreneurs, small businesses. And that's kind of how I got that was my first real entrepreneurial endeavor. And that's kind of how I got from magic into the rest of what I've done.
It's interesting because what I'm actually doing right now is similar. I didn't know it was actually called like marketing agency essentially, but helping small and medium-sized companies do their website, do branding, and also just like incorporate automation. So that's kind of the area that's a little different. But how did you find that like whole experience? Did it help you in some way to where you actually ended up going, and how so?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. I think trying anything is worthwhile. I've learned along the way that the faster you try, the faster you fail, the faster you learn something, and that's actually the only sort of positive movement that you can generate on your own. And so, like I learned a lot about business and sales, and I learned a lot about what I didn't like. So what I've said in the past is, TMP Media was scratching the entrepreneurial itch. I just didn't like the subject matter. I was like, I'm not going to. I didn't like building other people's dreams, like shaping their marketing strategies, their branding. I wanted to do that for myself. I was way more interested in building something kind of larger than me. And so that was the big learning was, okay, great. Yes, I validated that I am in fact an entrepreneur, but I don't really like this business. And it wasn't a straight line to Obie. I kind of like, I was so young when I had that business. So after university, or I should say during university, I wasn't a very great student. I was also working for my dad's company. And it was when I was doing that I came up with the idea for Obie. And so I was like, okay, that's actually something that I could find myself really passionate about and will also scratch the entrepreneurial itch. So that's kind of the leap from TMP to Obie.
And I guess during that time you said you did it very young. Do you like ever think back and imagine like it would have been different if you had like more work experience, like after university you had a full-time job for 5 years, or do you think just jumping right into it was a good call?
That's actually a really good question. I think I've thought about that in the past because I guess one anecdote I'll share is when I did this startup program in San Francisco back in 2017. It was called 500 Startups, and I was the youngest person in they call them batches, like groups of companies. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people were, as you described, right? They had, worked at Facebook or worked somewhere before jumping into the startup world. I really think it depends on the person. I've learned that I'm incapable of working for anyone else, which is not a good thing. It's just the reality. So not for me. And I think if anything, I wish I started earlier. I wish I was a little bit more aggressive. in pursuing what I knew that I really wanted, but I think it was timid to kind of jump in both feet. So, you know, yeah, 15's young, but I wish I would have started sooner, and you know, each step would have sort of like realized the full rotation sooner. Um, but yeah, for some people, they need that experience. Like you're going to gain experience from doing. And I'm glad that I got those ventures out of the way because to your point, I made a ton of mistakes. TMP Media was not successful. Obie was like somewhat successful. And so I hope that my current venture will be very successful because I've gone through the reps of learning the hard way.
And I guess it's interesting that you said you want to start like earlier than 15. I myself, like, I'm in my 20s, and I get it all the time that I look like 17, like 16, right? So I'm just wondering, like, how you thought it was being so young and like trying to sell something, a product, a service, to somebody who is like in their like 40s, 50s, and then looking at you. How did you think at that time? Did you kind of not let that get in the way? You just went up there, but what would you say to that?
Yeah, it's terrifying, and I'm a natural introvert. I always say that there's two types of founders, in my opinion. There's sales founders and product founders. I'm very much a product founder. I think people should lean into their strengths. But that being said, if you're a founder or you're a CEO or you're a business owner, you're gonna have to sell. And yeah, especially if you're young, you're fighting a bit of an uphill battle. It's funny. I'm trying to think back to those early interactions. I think we were always good at seeming bigger, older, more experienced than we actually were. And I think you can do that through the way you communicate, through the way you present yourself via a brand, via a website, and then yeah, eventually you're going to get on the phone or you're going to get on Zoom or Teams with someone, and there'll probably be judgment of your age. I think you just have to punch above your weight, like you have to come off so what's the right word? Confident
Right.
in what you're talking about, and but not arrogant. You have to show some humility.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I think that's what it is. I think there's a fine balance between like confidence, bravado, and humility when you're trying to punch above your weight.
Okay, interesting. And I think it's so much easier now with technology because usually the first introductions aren't like in person, so that kind of gives people an advantage. If they wanted to start at like 15, they can make an introduction via like email, via LinkedIn. So that's to all the young folks out there that also look a little young like me. So that's good to hear as well. And I guess, yeah, so you said after the media company, was it right after you went to start Obie AI?
Yeah, like there was a bit of a gap there where I was kind of half doing TMP, half working for my dad, and then was tinkering around with what became Obie. It was quite a long journey, but yeah.
Would you say like your dad basically is your influence, or is he like a mentor of yours that basically gave you that drive?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the reasons I became an entrepreneur, for sure. Funny though, it's the problem I'm solving with Reins is because people like me didn't take over their parents' business, and it's funny because when I was young and I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, my dad and I had many conversations about, taking over the business. And there was kind of this unwritten understanding that I wasn't going to. And there's nothing wrong with those businesses are great. Like they're the backbone of the North American economy. And, but for whatever reason, he was positioning it to me like, I want better for you. I don't want you to take over this business. And, yeah, I don't know. It was kind of like this unwritten thing, and I just knew I was never going to take over the business.
What was the business, if you mind me asking?
He still has it. It's like a commercial services business where they do like network cabling, camera systems, alarm systems for like grocery retailers.
So yeah, you kind of knew that in advance, at least, and then you found out that you weren't going to work for anybody else, but you wanted to definitely work for yourself. So entrepreneurship was essentially like the only route, and you participated in the accelerator program at McMaster?
Yeah, we went through the Forge at McMaster, Campus Linked Accelerator back in 2015, and we went through that was what became Obie. At the time it was actually called One Base, and we went to the Forge.
Yeah, I also interviewed on the last episode Peter Yang. I'm not sure if you remember him.
Oh yeah.
He started Reveerly. Yeah, I'm finding such interesting people. I'm just starting to talk with people that I already knew at McMaster, but how did you find that, like the Forge, how did it help you grow Obie? Do you think it gave you guys kind of a little bit of that support you needed to grow, or do you think you could have done it without them, essentially?
Well, if you said that I came and did a guest speaking slot at in your class, and if you worked with me, then you'll know that I'm not afraid about voicing my opinion. So I'm about to do that. Look, there's a lot of great people at the Forge. We did get some value out of the program. I think the problem is just in general with those programs, like the incentive alignment isn't there. Sorry, you're gonna get a long-winded answer from me.
All good.
There's just no incentive to have like really great people there to support entrepreneurship. Meaning, well, first of all, Canada's tricky for good entrepreneurial talent, and I don't think entrepreneurship can be taught. That's just a very strong opinion I have, and so I think they were trying to do a little of that because they needed to get people into the program to show that it was worthwhile to continue to maintain the funding from the school, as opposed to attracting the right entrepreneurs that are just happen to be there locally through mentorship and advisement from entrepreneurs that have already made it, or that are 3 steps ahead, 2 steps ahead, even 1 step ahead. We got a lot of like advice from professional services people and like people that have never started a company, never started a startup. And when you're young and malleable, that is terrible. It is, and in fact, it's wrong in my opinion. And I've vocalized that many times. I think for the most part, everyone there had good intentions. And like I said, we did meet a lot of great people. We did get value out of it, but we also burnt a lot of time. It's kind of embarrassing, but in hindsight, it's all 2020. It's like the fact that we took so much bad advice at the time, and that's not necessarily the Forge's fault. It's just like early stage startup programs in general. There's very little you can teach like startups that are pre-product market fit. Like here's what you need to do. Find a problem that's worth solving. Define whether that's like a venture problem or just like a small business problem. Depending on those answers, there's 2 very different playbooks. But then you just go talk to as many of them as you can and see how you can solve their problem in like an unscalable way. And then once you solve it in an unscalable way, solve it in a scalable way. And like that's like the secret. And so anyways, any other advice is kind of a distraction in my opinion, especially when you're young and kind of malleable and you don't know what you want to do with your life. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate the honesty there. I think definitely rather voice your thoughts authentically than not. So I actually I took like a 8-week program at a business development center. They also helped those who are interested in entrepreneurship. teach them like each aspect of like a business plan. And I found that interesting because I've never been taught that in school, at least. So it's like a different way of thinking, which I then made a business plan, but with that business idea, ended up not pursuing it after actually going out there in the world and getting like feedback from people. So I totally agree. Like learning, like by doing, for me personally, is like the best way to do it. But what do you think about like the basics of like having that business plan? Even though I'm sure most entrepreneurs don't even end up like executing the entire thing from top to bottom. They probably obviously adjust, but do you think starting from somewhere like that is a good process, or where would you start if you would start all over again?
Yeah. No, business plans are a terrible idea. They're way too prescriptive, and yeah. How would I start? I did just start a company, I guess, right? So I came up with a problem, which is really difficult. I think in hindsight, I spent 7 years building Obie. The only reason I lasted 7 years, which by the way is short like in the grand scheme of things, like life's long, and building anything great takes time. People have short attention spans, but 7 years is a slog for something that was a good success, not like a great success,
Mm-hmm.
and um, and the only reason I made it that through that journey was because I was obsessed with solving the problem. People get really obsessed with the solution or the underlying technology that they're using, or some other sort of emotional reason. But all those things are going to change if you stay in business long enough. And so really what you have to be passionate about is a problem that you can see yourself pursuing for a very long time. And so that's where I start when I think about building a company. What's a problem that I can really, really fall in love with and see myself spending, let's say, just for argument's sake, the rest of my life building. From there, it's, okay, well, who has that problem? Let's go talk to them. Let's go talk to 10, 20, 50 of them. What do they think? Yeah, that's a painful problem. Or no, no, that's not a painful problem. If it is, are you willing to pay for it? Great. How much? Great. Can I take your credit card and bill you for it? Awesome. And until you get like yes, you probably continue looking, continue iterating. I know it sounds like I'm oversimplifying it, but that is in reality. At least that's how I don't like giving prescriptive advice. Like I think everyone's different. That's how I've done it, and that's how I did it with Reins, and we validated our problem solution space quite quickly, just using that playbook essentially.
Interesting. And did they like teach that or mention that kind of strategy in any of the like programs you participated in?
Yeah, no, I'm sure they did. But like we just talked about it in 5 minutes, and you know, I spent years at the Forge and spending time on shit that I shouldn't have. And then I did 500 startups, and that was much higher quality. That was another accelerator. In San Francisco, like the mecca of tech. And look, there is programming that's valuable. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm oversimplifying one very small piece of starting a startup or building a company. Then once you crack that code, like, okay, yes, I have a problem. I have an ideal customer, and they're willing to pay for my thing. Well, then it's like, okay, well, how do I build it efficiently? How do I market it efficiently? How do I, fundraise if that's, the type of business that I'm building? And so programming for all of those things makes sense. And but yeah, I'm sure both of the programs mention that.
One thing I really love about these conversations is how real they are. Just honest stories from people who are building something out of nothing. That's exactly what inspired Click Digital Empowerment. If you're a small business owner or a solopreneur, we're actually going to be offering 10 free business audits, whether that's on your marketing or your operations, as well as a recommendation report with 3 different strategies on how to improve your business, as well as 1 free consultation. It's a simple step that could unlock real digital growth, and it will give you a good idea of how our services actually work. Just head to the link in the description where you'll be able to find a form to sign up to see if you are one of the first 10. Now back to the video. You said you went to San Francisco, and I also went there for like a short internship for a summer.
Cool.
But I was doing marketing there, and I definitely found like it was a startup of about 200 employees, a tech startup.
Awesome. That's a great
And
experience.
they were very passionate, and you can see like they were all very busy. Definitely like compared to the other internships at like corporate level in Canada, so much different. Like people are actually like enjoying the work that they're doing, which is really good to see. And I think at that time though, I was also thinking negatively though. I was like, these people are only thinking about money. Like I remember talking to HR, and they're saying how their employees job hop every 3 years. That's very common, right? Which might be interesting because like Reins is a way to like retain your employees for small and medium-sized companies. And I'm just wondering, like, I'm sure you guys have done a bunch of like research and spoke to a lot of companies. Do you think this model would be like really great in like for these San Francisco startups or any startups or small medium-sized companies where you do see common job hopping in that industry?
Totally fair question. So we exclusively sell to like the small independent business owner, like contractors, blue collar industries, like home services, HVAC, plumbing, electric type companies. So not Silicon Valley tech companies. However, what you're pointing out is like part of the inspiration for Rain. So the reason we're working with those companies is that they don't have access to the same tools as the Silicon Valley tech companies have. So I don't know, you were an intern, so you probably didn't get equity, but most of those companies, employees running around in the office with like their, like a chicken with their head cut off, they probably all had stock options. And so that is in part what we're trying to um, replicate with the 33 million small business owners in the US who are not part of like the tech ecosystem or private equity or big corporate. However, I think what you're pointing out is really interesting is that the equity doesn't actually help retain those employees in a lot of tech companies. And the reason for that, I think, is because it's become an entitlement. It's just become another benefit that you expect to get at a startup. And just like any other solution, it doesn't operate, it doesn't solve a problem without also you incorporating that into your culture. So if you don't actually explain to employees what equity means, what having skin in the game actually means, and how their performance relates to the equity and the goals of the business, and how that means that they're going to make more money or create more wealth, then it's charity essentially, and that's what's happened. That's what's happened in Silicon Valley. So, very good observation.
And how do you like compare that to like bonuses or different models? Like what makes that and also I wanted to talk about like phantom that term I saw as well. Like I didn't quite understand that. So if you can maybe give a little bit of a comparison.
Yeah, generally, like bonuses and incentives are completely different. Incentives are almost they're inherently performance based, so they are designed to elicit a behavioral change. Whereas bonuses often, maybe unintended, they become entitlements, like I just mentioned. So it's like a Christmas bonus is the perfect example of that. Employees don't do anything different, so it just becomes charity. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with charity, right? But know that that's what you're doing when you're giving the average bonus. Now you could say, well, hey, Chris, there's commissions, there's, performance bonuses. Yeah, those are better, but oftentimes and I'm not comparing like oh, you can't do bonuses, you must do incentives. But I'm just sort of pointing out some of the facts of bonuses. With commissions or performance bonuses, often they can be parasitic, meaning if I'm trying to um, compensate you, Brooke, for performing some action, let's say sales. I want you to increase the amount of sales that you provide, right? So for each sale, I'm going to give you a bonus. That's fine. You're incentivized to sell more, but you're not incentivized to help your colleagues sell more. You're not incentivized to think long term for the business. So you're not thinking about costs. You're thinking, well, all I need to do is sell.
Mm-hmm.
So I may be extremely inefficient with company time, money. As long as I sell, I'm going to get my bonus. So
Right.
with incentives, you try and align the company goals with the financial outcomes for those employees. So, an example would be we're going to share profits to all employees equally, but only if collectively we hit a net profit goal. And if we hit that net profit goal, we'll share profits with the team. And in order to earn your share, there may be some specific performance condition you have to meet. So that's the difference between incentives and bonuses. And that's part of what we unlock at Reins. Uh, that's the profit sharing side of our business, generally speaking. And you mentioned phantom equity. So when I sort of describing tech companies versus like the other small independent business owners in the US, the difference, there's a lot of differences, but the number one difference is that startups are typically C corps, and C corps are corporations. They're designed to have multiple different share classes, shareholders, because you bring on investors and other capital partners. And so that legal structure uh, affords you to have a lot of different options, like ISO stock options, RSUs, all kinds of different equities. But the 33 million businesses in the US that don't look like that are mostly LLCs. And in the LLC structure, the options are more limited. And so that's where we identified phantom equity as a really good fit for that. It's essentially like a incentive bonus, but it mirrors the value of the company stock. So you can give people a portion of the company and gets paid out in the form of a cash payment at some later date, usually the sale of the business or some performance event. And so it gives all the benefits of ownership without any of the headaches. Now, you could use phantom equity in a startup, um, and in a C corp, you can, um, and it's got all the same benefits. Like when you give someone ownership, like if my one of my employees exercise their stock option, they have rights now, information rights, voting rights, and for some business owners, they don't they're not interested in that. They're interested in giving the monetary benefit, but without any of the complexities of ownership. And so um, that's kind of the lay of the land in terms of phantom equity and incentives.
What kind of like I guess businesses do you guys mainly work with, and like how many employees do they usually have? What's the ownership structure usually like with those ones?
Yeah, it's usually just a single owner or like a husband wife kind of duo.
Okay.
Um, you're looking at like 10 to 100 employee local HVAC plumbing businesses is like our sweet spot. Um, but we work with all kinds of different contractors and construction trades.
And do you find that when they do like use Reins and the services for profit sharing, that their employees are like performing better? Do you? I guess you can probably see some of the data trends over time. So
Yeah, yeah. So, one of the stats we are tracking is 75% of employees that say that, sorry, 75% of employees say that equity and stock ownership are the most effective motivators for them sticking around at the company. But what we're seeing in practice is there's just an instant alignment, right? They've got an owner who's all of a sudden being super transparent with them. They're saying, look, here's how profit works at my company. If we hit this, I'm going to share some of it with you. And here's what I expect of you. So it's kind of a shit or get off the pot moment, right? It's like, it's very, if you do, the actions that we know and believe are what's going to drive this company forward, everyone's going to win. If you've heard that rising tide lifts all boats saying, that's kind of what we're seeing. And then it's twofold, right? It's like motivation, engagement, and retention. That's kind of one bucket. And the other bucket is recruiting. So in the trades, the talent market is super tight. It's really hard to find um, plumbers, electricians, contractors in general, let alone really good ones. And you're competing with all the other um, businesses in your area. And so what do? They compete on salary, they compete on just benefits, and it's basically a very, very level playing field. But if you introduce these incentives, you can actually now give someone an outsized benefit in your business without any additional cost because it doesn't actually cost you anything to give someone phantom equity. It costs you when you sell the business or later on, but there's no cost. Like when you increase salary to compete, it costs you something immediately, right? I got to go from 50K to 75K to get this guy. It's going to cost you $25,000.
Right.
Actually doesn't cost you anything to give away some equity and some future profits, not until they've performed. And that's what's
Mm-hmm.
cool about this benefit.
Yeah, that's such an interesting model. Do you only serve the United States or like Canada as well? How far have you guys scaled?
Just US now. We are you familiar with like the Y Combinator safe?
No.
It's okay. It's a their template for convertible notes. It's like how a lot of early stage startups raise money. We created our equivalent of the safe. We call it the MARE, the Modern Agreement for Rewards and Equity. It's the easiest way to give equity in a small business. The reason I'm telling you this is because we had to work with some really fancy compensation lawyers to create and innovate on this framework for phantom equity and profit sharing. And so the framework is just available in the US right now, but we're hoping that in the future we can expand globally.
And was this idea like I know this business is founded by I think a team of three was it? Um, like I guess who like just woke up one day and like thought of this idea. Like I usually have the best ideas like when I'm doing the dishes or like doing the randomest things. Um, and yeah, how did that idea even start? Was there something in the market that was already similar? Yeah, I'm just interested about that, I guess.
I had an idea for quite some time actually before I even sold Obie. I was getting excited about this idea of helping small business owners in general. I noticed like you may have heard, it's a terrible term, but silver tsunami. It's like all of, I don't know, you're younger than me, but my parents are the baby boomer generation. So the silverhead, they are like retiring in big,
Okay.
big droves. And so there's a silver tsunami of like wealth transferring between baby boomers and millennials and beyond. And so I was kind of interested in that whole like economic trend and originally actually wanted to help business owners sell their company. So
Mm.
like a biz buy sell marketplace, in part inspired by my dad's business. Um, but then going back to the pro tip about just go talk to what you think your ideal customer is,
Yeah.
we did, and we kind of gleaned, and this is kind of the art, not the science part, is like they're like, yeah, it's an interesting idea. But we could kind of glean that it wasn't a, I need to solve this right now problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I felt like they could keep punting for some time. But in each conversation, I would ask, well, what is your number one challenge in the business? And they would say, people, hiring them, keeping them. getting them to
Oh,
do what I need them to do.
yeah.
Um, and I don't know how we got like leaped that to like the exact Reins product, but it was kind of like iteration after minor iteration. Like, there was one owner who we talked to who was actually trying to do this. He was like, I'm not ready to sell the business, but I want one of my key employees, like my general manager, I want to give him a piece of the company. And I don't know how to do it. I was like, ah. And so we just did it for him.
Started with one, and
Yeah.
then from there on.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, yeah, keep talking to more people. And
Uh,
they also had the challenge. And
how like um how long did it take to get like your first 100 customers? Like,
we're not there yet. We only have our first, like, well, we, you, with startups, right? Like, there's different like permutations of it. So we've done over 400 plans for
okay.
businesses across the U.S. On our one subscription product that we eventually built, we've got around 55 customers. Um, so yeah, and every startup is different because every customer type is different. Like, selling to small independent contractors in the US is very different than like selling to HR at, 500-person tech companies. And
Right.
what we did was we created an early version of the mayor, and we put it on a landing page, and we ran an ad against it for people searching for phantom stock, and um, thousands of people downloaded it. And
Okay.
we worked
Yeah.
through it analog with them, and then we're like, well, what if we could do this with software?
Yeah, I've heard like the first, I'm not sure, like the first very small percentage of customers are usually the very hardest to kind
Oh
of.
yeah, it's like brute force. Yeah, there's no like, it's ugly. You're calling people, you're knocking on their door, you're begging them. Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you, I mean, you've done so many different startups, and how do you like get through that, like maybe first year, first 2 years that are the hardest? Like, how do you get out of bed and, rejection after rejection, still keep going?
Yeah, that's why I think it's like entrepreneurship can't be taught. You either have that muscle or you don't. Like,
Mm-hmm.
not saying it's easy, trust me, but I got to love rejection. I just loved the idea of proving someone or proving the market wrong, or what have you. Um, you Going back to my other point, you have to be obsessed with the problem. If you're obsessed with the problem, then you're not worried about rejection because you're just focused on solving the problem.
So basically, like if anybody's trying to get, there's a lot of TikToks and YouTube videos how to get rich in like a month. Those people definitely
Well, not
won't
me.
do
I
well.
mean, maybe I'm not that smart, which is totally possible. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't think any of those things have stay power either. Like, I don't think, this is just my opinion. Maybe I'm getting old, but like, I don't think like influencers is like, that's not a great career path in my opinion. It's like there's no stay power. Um, and it's kind of like social engineering. It's just not good at all altogether. But yeah, I don't think there's any get rich quick schemes.
And I also saw, like, yeah, you mentioned right before we started recording, but I saw that you had a podcast for a short period of time. I think you were up to like 3 seasons. Were you and your co-host at the time trying to like be influencers? I guess I'm curious about like the reasoning of starting the podcast and some of, I guess, the lessons learned, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. No, definitely weren't trying to be influencers. I guess a byproduct of, a podcast or content is attention, right? You're trying to garner attention. I'm sure you have some idea of who the audience for this podcast is, and I'm sure it's strategic. Uh, but the reason we started it is because he was a marketer, and um, I had the idea for the podcast, and I thought the idea was unique, and I don't like doing things that everyone else is doing. And podcasts, like, they were becoming popular, but they weren't a thing like they are now. Like, it was back in 2016, 2017 when we started that podcast. So they were the thing, but they weren't like that. Not everyone had one. And
Mm-hmm.
and so it was kind of this combination of, like, he was like, "Ah, let's try this podcast medium," and I was like, "Oh, well, I've got a good idea. I think a unique spin for, like, the content." The idea was called The Art of the Fail, and we talked about failure, talked to people who were either on the other side of it, whether good or bad, and like what did they learn from it, essentially, because it was just came from my obsession of, like, listening to folks that I really admire, um, just other entrepreneurs, like, tell their story, like, not like a tell me how to build a business. It's like, just tell me what you did, what worked and what didn't, and I'm gonna like glean, like, that's how I learn. And so I figured, it's kind of a cool concept. And it was, I mean, we had, I don't know, few tens of thousands of downloads, from the podcast, but it was a lot of work, and the tooling wasn't as good as it is now, where you can, like, really churn out content really fast. Like, I did a lot of manual editing, and I did it all myself.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't have time, unfortunately, and that kind of took the love out of it. Um, so yeah, you really got to love it. And we didn't get to the scale that others got to, but I think the idea is that you just have to keep doing it. And um, and I think it's just got to be unique. It's got to be unique. It's so hard to cut through the noise of all the other content out there.
Did you have any like specific thing that you noticed among all the innovators, entrepreneurs that you interviewed? Was there something like the biggest lesson that you essentially took from all of them out of that kind of project you worked on for that year?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I've ever, like, retroed on the whole, like, the totality of all the conversations I had about failure, but I think I would group that in with my own experience, and, like, the punchline is failure's great. Like, learn from it, don't dwell on it. And I think people ask me, like, do you have an advice for, like, startups or startup founders? And like I said earlier, I don't like giving prescriptive advice. I just like to tell what I did, what I didn't do, what's worked for me, what hasn't worked. But the number one thing I think I taken away from my experience is just the speed in which you fail determines your success. Um, Point blank. That's, like, the number one thing, because um, it's the fastest way you can learn what works and what doesn't. And I know, in hindsight, for example, with Obie, now having looked at it in the rearview mirror and see, like, billion-dollar companies that have been built on the same idea, it's like, okay, I was too conservative. I was too, um, uh, I didn't fail fast enough. We didn't learn how to get to the next iteration fast enough.
So if you could essentially like go back in time before you saw these other companies that you were thinking that you should have failed fast enough, do you think there's like certain things specifically, like talking to more people in that industry, going to more of these like events in that industry? Is there anything in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of little things that are kind of contextual that aren't really interesting to say out loud, but um, uh, if I had to summarize it, it's like trusting my gut more. Like, I'm not right all the time, but let's say my gut's right 70% of the time. I should have just done that immediately
Okay.
when I had the intuition, you know? Whereas, like, you wait 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and to do what you knew you should have done 12 months ago. And that time crushes you. There's a new competitor. The competitors acquired new customers. The competitors acquired new funding just to get to the next step, and you just get further and further and further behind. That's kind of the macro learning.
And I do find that's the case, especially like when you're taught to like plan and do like all this like research before. So I think it's kind of like ingrained in some of the ways we were brought up. But definitely I feel like jumping in sounds scary, but it does sound like the fastest way to learn for sure. And just because we have a few minutes left, I kind of wanted to also talk about kind of like what's next, maybe what's next for you, what's next for Reins, and maybe the next, let's say, like 5 years, at least. Where do you see or would like to go?
Yeah, I'm super just having a blast building this company, building it the way that, my gut tells me to build it instead of what other people's input. So it really does feel like my life's work in a lot of ways. We're just trying to scale up, get the message about Reins in front of as many contractors in the U.S. as humanly possible. That's our goal. So we've got big growth goals for 2025, and like I said, I'm just excited to solve a real problem for businesses who are really the backbone of our economy, and I think who have been in a lot of ways forgotten, and then unlock a form of equity that these employees that work for these businesses wouldn't have otherwise had. They don't typically have retirement plans. They don't typically have a lot of savings. And so I think we have an opportunity to do really good work at actually giving them a piece of that silver tsunami coming down from the baby boomers. And so I'm just really excited about the mission of Reins. And 5 years is too far out. I don't know where we'll be in 5 years.
And I also forgot to ask, but I was just really curious about like why Las Vegas, out of all places.
Yeah, so it comes full circle. I was very comfortable with Las Vegas because I used to come here all the time as a kid. My dad would visit for trade shows, and he had a small condo here when I was young, and my co-founder and I ended up moving from Canada to the Bay Area because that's where we thought we needed to be with Obie. And then COVID happened, and we decided we didn't want to be in California anymore. So we were looking for a different place, and Vegas was on the list, and ended up here. We love it. We're building a fully in-person company in Vegas, and excited to grow here.
Honestly, sounds a lot of fun. It's cool to see how your life has evolved over the years, and I hope that you were able to kind of share some of the thoughts maybe you've always wanted to share. I don't know how many people are going to watch this, but at least myself, I've definitely enjoyed listening and following along. So I'm excited to see where Reins does go, and I'll definitely be following along, and I'll even put some of the details of Reins and your website as well, your Chris Buttenham website below, in case anybody does want to connect or check out Reins. So I really appreciate it, and this was I found a really insightful conversation, so I'm definitely going to take a lot of things away from it, and I hope we stay in touch. But thank you for joining me on this episode, and we'll see you in the next one.
My pleasure, Brooke. Thank you so much.